Welcome to the Legally Ever After Real Estate Podcast, where we help you build, protect, and pass on your assets. I'm your host, estate planning attorney, Pamela Moss-Garrett. Let's get started. All right, today we have Ryan Kalamaya. He is a family law attorney here in Colorado, and he is going to be talking about protecting real estate investments from divorce. Welcome, Ryan.
Thanks, Pamela. Glad to be here on your podcast.
I'm glad to have you. Kind of the first question is a big one. Can real estate be lost in a divorce? Real estate that was owned or inherited before the marriage?
Yeah, in order to really answer and dig into that question, Pamela, I think it's helpful for listeners to understand just some basics on the divorce process and how property is addressed in a divorce. So in Colorado, like most states, if there is real estate, whether that be in a partnership or an LLC or some sort of entity, or someone owns a house, if it's owned before the marriage, then it is what's called separate property. And then the same thing for if it's gifted, someone inherits it. Those under Colorado law are ways that parties in a divorce can claim separate property. Colorado is a little bit unique in that it considers the increase in value on separate property to be marital. And so if we have an ideal client that we call Eric Wolf. If Eric owned a commercial building that was $1 million and now it's $2 million, then $1 million is set off to the side in separate property. And then the increase, the $1 million, is marital. And there's nothing in Colorado that says that you have to divide the marital portion 50-50. And importantly, for people that own real estate, separate property, the judge in Colorado cannot order the sale or transfer separate property. So Eric would have that $2 million commercial building, and that would be his. The judge couldn't do anything, but the judge could say, you need to pay your wife $1 million. And it may, as a practical matter, result in Eric having to either take out a significant loan against the commercial building or to sell it.
That's super helpful. And people talk a lot about premarital agreements and post-marital agreements. Are those useful to put in place to protect these investments? And what are your tips around those?
They are. So we deal with premarital agreements and marital agreements or post-nuptial agreements a fair amount in our practice. And they are very helpful, especially when real estate is involved, because going back to my original discussion about separate property, then it's really hard to go back and say, well, Eric had a commercial building and it was worth X when he was married. I mean, you can get a retroactive appraisal. They tend to be fairly expensive, but it's not like where you own Apple stock and you can go to Google Finance and you can say on March 3rd, 2000, that Apple stock was worth X, and you can figure out how much it's increased over time. So the issue is addressed with a premarital agreement. And importantly for people to go through that process, it's kind of like estate planning. It's like what you do, Pamela, and I'm sure that you have the conversation with your clients that it's better to talk about what you're going to do when you're alive, as opposed to leaving other people figure out what to do when they've passed away. And really, when people are married or they're engaged, they can have intelligent conversations about what to do with various property. And if Eric Wolf comes into the marriage with $1 million, then he can have that conversation about what's going to happen. And when you have disclosure, it's a key tenet to a premarital or a marital agreement. You have to have disclosure. So it is a contract, but Eric's going to have to disclose that he owns $1 million. And through that process, there is going to be a discussion about what should happen on that increase. And Eric and his wife can agree that any increase in value is going to be Eric's remain his separate property. And so you can have those conversations at the very beginning. What happens with rent? What happens with the various dividends or other things that may be attendant to that commercial building are things that you can really address in a premarital or even a marital agreement. A marital agreement is going to take the same process and form. And what I would always recommend is both people have lawyers involved to make sure that they go through it, because as well as they can communicate oftentimes during that engagement phase and negotiating, then when things go off the rails and they go through a divorce, those premarital agreements can oftentimes be challenged. We see them a lot. I've got a podcast and we've addressed several of those topics about how premarital agreements are challenged. So, it's really incumbent on people to do disclosure, to deal with it ahead of time in a timely manner. Don't wait until the day before your wedding to go through that, and really make sure you have some competent attorneys to make sure that the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. It's the same thing with estate planning. Those drafting errors or people that don't know what they're doing can result in more headache than, solutions.
Yeah, something I've come across lately with more and more real estate investors is people that are not married. They're cohabitating. And so cohabitation agreements are another option as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that there's a case, Bacharach v. Salzman, that addresses what happens when there's real estate involved. And in that case, there was a contractor that did some work on the house, but then the house wasn't actually titled in his name. And Colorado addressed what happened in those circumstances. So there can be claims, and things are great till they're not, till the relationship sours. And it's in particular a real challenge with real estate because it's generally not illiquid, and people can get emotionally tied if it's especially a residence. But when we've had the increase in values, real estate oftentimes is the most valuable asset in a marriage or a relationship. So it can result in people really having some disputes, and a premarital agreement is an effective way to address that before it really becomes a problem.
Yeah, and some of the reasons I'm recommending clients on the estate planning side get marital agreements is a lot of times with blended families. I have clients who it's their second marriage and they have children and they have real estate between the two of them, and they want to split things up in a way that if they die isn't necessarily going to follow state law. They want to legally disinherit each other. They want to give things to each other's kids. And a lot of times I'm recommending they do a marital agreement so we don't unwind the estate plan. Are there other reasons that you are recommending clients, maybe in the context of blended families or others, consider a marital agreement after they're already married?
I think people certainly that are in second marriages, they've gone through divorce, they know how challenging it can be, especially if real estate is involved. And I totally agree. I mean, I always tell my clients they're going through divorce, hey, if you're going to get remarried, you probably didn't read the fine print in the fee agreement, but you're obligated to invite me to the wedding, which is just a divorce lawyer bad joke. But second is get yourself a marital agreement or premarital agreement. The interesting thing, Pamela, too, that I'm seeing is that millennials, generally people younger, they're more open to premarital agreements because they've seen their parents go through it and they understand the reality, the statistics. I mean, they're out there. So they go in and no one goes into a wedding, especially if it's a second, where they think it's going to end in a divorce, but they're not naive, and especially if it's a second marriage. But the history of marital agreements really starts in Old England, but it's from those second marriages because there were these inheritance laws back in Old England where they would there was a reason for them to contractually have these agreements. But I think it's incumbent on people to have a conversation about how much you're going to leave for your primary kids, your kids out of your first marriage. And are you going to have second kids, or, people who are older, they might be marrying someone that is, younger, who wants to start a family. I certainly have some clients that are in that. And then you have to have a conversation about, are you going to, is one person going to stay at home? And that might be a consideration for some financial terms in the marital agreement or premarital agreement, because they're leaving their career. But then also, what's going to happen if that one of the spouses predeceases the other? And so, there's some real estate planning mechanics and important terms in that premarital agreement that can really drive estate planning. And you got to see it as a holistic and augment your estate plan with those marital and premarital agreements.
Yeah, and that's why I really appreciate your approach, Ryan. And I know with my clients, a lot of times it's this generational wealth. They're leaving their kids real estate that's been in their family for generations, and they can leave it in a way in an asset protection trust that it wouldn't get lost in a divorce, or it wouldn't have to be sold so that money gets distributed. We can keep it in the family, but without that plan, it sounds like from your perspective, it could get potentially lost in a divorce, even inheritance, because of the gain potentially going to the future spouse.
Yeah, it really depends. I've seen it so many different ways, and it's one of the things I enjoy most about my work is I get to see how different families. I'm up in Aspen, so we see some significant generational wealth, and it usually comes down to two different mechanisms or paths. Is some people will push that gifting from generation to generation, and they'll create partnerships. They'll gift money ahead of time, or they'll hold back and they'll have trusts or other things that are triggered when someone dies. And it really does matter if someone's a beneficiary or if they have set that up for their children. And understanding those dynamics, I think, is really important when you're dealing with real estate and real estate investments in divorce.
So if divorce is imminent and people are listening to this, what can they do? Is it too late? Is there any tips that you have for them if they want to protect their real estate?
Yeah, I've got 5 tips for people if divorce is imminent. The first is that, particularly with real estate, there's often leverage and credit applications. Interest rates at the time of us recording, Pamela, they're skyrocketing. And so people are a little bit less bullish on taking on a significant amount of debt. But if they do, then they need to understand that, one, that loan application is likely going to be disclosed in the divorce. So if they say property is worth X, they need to understand that there's different incentives with that loan application, because people often in those loan applications, or if it's someone soliciting investment, they're trying to fundraise, they're incentivized to say that the real estate or the company is worth $1 billion, and then in the divorce, oh my gosh, the $1 billion company or the $1 billion real estate investment is worthless. And so people just need to understand that if they're filling out those loan applications, that it's going to be disclosed. The second tip is, don't make significant moves with money. Don't go raid the savings account, drain $100,000. It's going to cause a lot of waves. They're going to find out about it. And it really is not something that I would recommend. That said, if there's domestic violence or there's some other interest, if a wife she has no access to money, then there might be some reason for, if she does have access, to make sure that she has a cushion. But generally speaking, those big financial decisions, they should think twice about it. And that kind of brings me to my third tip, and that is, think about buying. I currently have a case right now where someone went out and bought a piece of property for $4+ million, and now they're facing a liquidity crunch. Real estate is great for the long term, but it is not the most liquid asset, and you can borrow against it, sure, but as I mentioned before, interest rates are pretty high, and if you can sit in cash and hold off on making any major purchases before a divorce, is the time to really think about that. The fourth is to find an attorney that you trust. It's never too late. If people come to me at the very end, they think they have a settlement, happy to take a look at their divorce agreement. But really where the value I can add is at the very beginning. There could be some divorce planning. There could be a lot, and often there is a ton of anxiety about what is going to happen in the future. And people cannot tell you how many times people say, I'm so glad that I now know I have someone in my corner, and you alleviated a lot of my anxiety. And when people are anxious, when they're emotional, they don't make rational decisions. And we'll get into common mistakes I see, but really finding an attorney is a tip. Whether it's me or somebody else, find someone that you trust. And then the final point is that I tell people that I'm a counselor. I'm a counselor at law. I'm a really expensive counselor, and I'm not trained in the mental health space. So I always tell people, find a therapist, a counselor, a divorce coach, someone that you can talk to, because it's a real struggle. And I think that in particular, guys like me, we think we can just white knuckle our way through a divorce. But when you've got something as complex as real estate investments, where there can be these disputes on how much it's worth and depreciation and some really technical aspects, when you throw kids in the mix, it can be overwhelming for many people, and it's a real challenge. And I always recommend people go get the support that you need. So those would be my 5 tips for people that if divorce is imminent.
That's super helpful. And I can see just from what you've shared so far, how getting the advice sooner rather than later is going to save you a lot more time and money. And just from things that people think are kind of innocuous, like filling out loan applications and doing things to be proactive, how that can come back to really bite you. So that's super helpful. You mentioned common mistakes. What are the common mistakes that you see people making that they can avoid?
Number one common mistake, and this will resonate probably with many of your audience if they're into real estate. People keep the house when they shouldn't keep the house. And that doesn't mean that you always sell the family house, but when people become emotionally tied to their home, I see people reaching and they come back to me and they say, I can't afford it. They really need to think about whether or not that house makes sense. It may have some bad juju. But I also understand it's a consistent thing, especially when kids are involved, but it depends on the age of the kids. But people, they don't understand that they probably refinanced within the last 5 years when interest rates were really low. They're going to have to refinance, and whether or not they can keep that house, people will stretch and they make the mistake of overreaching on their real estate. And I just see that over and over again. The second is overlooking transaction costs, and in particular taxes. Real estate investors, they may have 1031 property from one to the other, and they are likely aware of taxes. Depreciation is a great tax benefit. It's a legal tax benefit. We actually just had a case in Colorado with the Court of Appeals that codified what at least divorce lawyers like me had been arguing, and that is that normal depreciation in real estate is a legit expense when it comes to determining income for alimony, maintenance, and child support, because it was a little bit unclear. There's some great benefits with real estate, but people often ignore that those taxes and brokers' commissions, those things are oftentimes overlooked. Transferring property in a divorce is a non-taxable, again, under 1041 of the IRS tax code. And I'll give the caveat, I'm not a tax advisor, I'm not a tax lawyer, but I do see people frequently miss the implications of those taxes. And so if they've had, up here in the mountains, we've seen $1 million properties become $3 million properties. And that, if they're going to sell it, that's going to be above and beyond the $500,000 exclusion. And they don't really think about that, even if they're selling that house. So that's the second thing. The third is, and Pamela, you're active on social media. You've done a great job with your business. People, it can be a good thing, but people can slam their spouse on social media. And I've seen some just really horrible things when people are emotional. If you think posting about your anger on your ex-wife at 3 a.m. after a couple glasses of wine, glasses of wine is a good idea, then you need to think twice. It is, it's going to cause issues. Don't post on social media about your divorce. Don't delete anything. You might change your privacy settings, but I do see people really do some emotional things that they later regret. The fourth thing is really thinking emotionally and acting out of revenge, guilt, or anger instead of thinking critically. Oftentimes, especially real estate investors, they have spreadsheets, they have IRR, they have gone through the analysis, and when it comes to their own personal life, that stuff goes out the window. And really, that's how they should be approaching it. But they need to consider again, the emotional capital that they're willing to expend and the transaction costs with lawyers and everything, and really think about it as a business decision. That said, doing it themselves is often a mistake that people later regret, whether it be later just consulting with someone under what's called a limited scope representation, where they just bounce ideas off. That is something I recommend. My firm, we have a podcast and a series of how-to videos to educate people. At a minimum, people should go and familiarize themselves with the process, and then consult with an attorney at the very end. Usually, especially on the financial aspects, if there's real estate investing and going on, they really, really need to consult with an attorney. That's a mistake I often see, because they can come back and have to relitigate their divorce 2 years, 3 years down the road, and it can cost 2-3x what they would have spent if they had done it right the first time. The other point on that is that one of the common mistakes I see is people not being completely honest with their attorney. If they are trying to hide something, then under Colorado law, the court has up to 5 years to reallocate property if there was a lack of disclosure, if there was an omission. I call it divorce remorse, and it relates to doing it right with an attorney and getting those disclosures in the divorce process done correctly. Because if you're not being honest and you think that you're going to pull a fast one, it can often come back and haunt you. And again, you're looking at some serious costs related to relitigating your divorce. And then the final point, which relates to you, Pamela, is I see people that don't change their will or estate plan after a divorce. And I know that you've come on my podcast to talk about that. I hope people check out that episode. But it is a really common feature that I see, that people just kind of they're done with lawyers. They are so exhausted, but it's an opportunity for them to restart their life. It's a new chapter. And along with that, they need to write that new chapter and what they hope to achieve. And that's done through an estate plan. And I oftentimes see people overlook that.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate you bringing these points to light. Ryan, when it comes to finding the right attorney, I think there's some people who just think like, oh, I need the most aggressive attorney out there to win. What's your take on, how should people find the right attorney? What's kind of the right fit for their specific needs?
I oftentimes tell people that if they pay me to win, not for entertainment. If people want entertainment and they want, the swords out and fighting, they're going to drain. It's just going to cost a lot. And it really, I think, depends on the dynamic. There are people that have been beaten down, emotionally, and they hire a lawyer because they're trying to protect themselves from themselves. I mean, they really know that they've given in for 20 years and that they are concerned, understandably so. So I think it really depends on the circumstance. Depends on costs, certainly. My ideal client is not someone that earns $25,000. I mean, I'm in charge of a legal aid foundation, Alpine Legal Services, and there are attorneys that specialize in that. So it really depends on the price point, depends on the skill and the experience, and that I think people need to kind of decide for themselves. And I think it's just a personality fit. I'm not the best fit for every client. I don't hold myself out to be. And so really, I think having a consultation with an attorney to figure out based on what their goals are. I ask people, what do you hope to achieve? Like, what do you want your divorce to be like? And if they start pulling out, I want, you to have more money than my spouse, then I say I'm not the right attorney. I'm not the one to exact revenge. You're not going to be satisfied. And a win for me is someone in 2 to 3 years who comes back and says, listen, I was in a really bad spot. I could tell things to you that I could tell to no one else. And you really helped me objectively assess, and I'm able to speak with my spouse. We don't hate each other. We're both in a better place than we were a couple years ago, and we've been able to move on. That's a win for me. If someone tries to extract every single cent and they're not speaking, and the kids are in therapy because the parents can't get along, that seems to be a failure in part by the lawyers to help people move on to better places.
That's super helpful. And I think, a divorce is such a vulnerable place to be in, and being able to bring that objectivity and have that, that path to bring people to a better place in 2 to 3 years, really realizing what that is and what that can look like is very helpful. Do you feel like, the court system has changed since the pandemic when it comes to how, obviously there's been a flood of divorce, at least what I hear anecdotally, but what have you seen as far as kind of the landscape for divorces in Colorado over the last couple of years?
That's a great question. So I guess a couple points on that. One is that we anecdotally hear about divorce increasing during the pandemic. I did an analysis, and the divorce rates, actually the divorce filings, didn't increase, at least in 2020 or 2021. Certainly we're seeing maybe some residual effects, and whatever is going on with the market, correction, recession, whatever you want to call it, I do think that is going to place some additional stress. I've dealt with divorces in a recession during the Great Recession, and the disputes are a little bit different because people are arguing over debt. But I think your point is well taken. The second is that, so my partner, Amy Gosha, has really spearheaded a new program on limited, paralegals, and having limited guidance by not just lawyers, but paralegals. And it's to really ensure access to justice for those that can't afford it. And I think it's a great program. She's been featured on the news, and that is something that has been, very much different. And a lot of people are looking forward to that. So that's been a significant change. The final point to your, question is Zoom, and, we're recording this over the web, and I'm dealing with divorces in Boulder and Telluride, where I can service clients because I'm a good fit for their particular needs, and people aren't restricted necessarily to the lawyer just down the street, and they can really specialize. It obviously depends on the court and the issues involved, but we're seeing expert witnesses. In my Telluride case, I had a Denver financial forensic accountant who was able to take on that case, and the travel costs were not as much of an issue because the court was very much open to dealing with virtual testimony. So we didn't have to pay an expert to go to Telluride, which is really expensive. So I'm seeing a lot of that in professionals. I think divorce coaches, now all of a sudden we're able to have divorce coaches help clients nationwide via Zoom, and some of those issues I think really have been an improvement, where sometimes I would have to drive to Eagle from Aspen, and that's a courthouse that you and I used to be prosecutors. That was a courthouse that I was a prosecutor in, but for me to drive 2 hours for a 15-minute status conference, it just isn't really economically feasible for our clients or efficient. Now the courts are much more open to that, but it really depends on the judge. My judge here in Pickens County in Aspen loves WebEx, the video conferencing platform, and as a result, I mean, it's a competitive advantage for me because I really enjoy using technology. Our firm has invested a considerable amount in the technology features. So screen sharing and webcams and the other aspects that are attendant with the web conferencing, we're really familiar with that. Where some lawyers, there was one of my main competitors here in Aspen, he retired after a virtual hearing because he just knew that he couldn't keep up. So, we're really seeing some changes in the marketplace, but I think it's net really good for people because they may want to have a consultation from their car because of privacy or other reasons that they want to address with me in Zoom, as opposed to driving to my office and walking in. It's a lot more efficient with kids and work schedules. So I've been pleased with the changes that have come out of COVID, notwithstanding the appearance that divorce filings have certainly increased.
Yeah, that's super helpful to understand. And it sounds like it's really to consumers' benefits. So, you serve people statewide. Can you tell a little bit more about your practice and the best way people can get in contact with you and your firm?
Yeah, so I'm the managing partner of Kalamaya Gosha. We do criminal defense, personal injury, and domestic relations. I'm based up in the mountains. I specialize in complex property valuations, usually estates involving more than $5 million, whether it be real estate or trusts or business owners. My partner, Amy, is based in our Cherry Creek office, and she really kind of takes the lead on, in particular, parenting disputes, so parental relocations, high conflict custody disputes. But we also have several younger associates that we mentor and oversee, and they're at lower price points, and usually will deal with a whole range. So we can often service anyone that really is on the Front Range, in the mountains, or the western slope. So that's a little bit about me. I grew up in Longmont, so I mentioned I have a case in Boulder. I'm familiar with up and down the Front Range because I grew up there. And Pamela, I know you and I went to CU Law School, so I go down there a fair amount. But people can reach out to me at my website, which is kalamaya.law, and that's KALAMAYA.law, and our phone number is 970-236. I'm going to strike that. We're going to have to edit that. 970-315-2365.
Great. And I'm a huge fan of your podcast. We'll definitely include the link in the show notes for both your podcast and for your firm. The final question that I have for everybody, Ryan, is what is your legacy?
My legacy is my kids. I want to I have an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old, and I want to raise kind, concerned, interesting kids. And I try to lead by example. So my practice, even though I deal with divorce, is to really try to lead by example. And one of the things that I enjoy most about my practice is being able to help people become better parents, to be better business owners, to be better real estate investors. And I really consider my clients to be my friends oftentimes. And so my legacy is my kids, but it's also my clients who are moving on to different phases in their life, and they can do that very angrily and resentfully, or they can do it optimistically and with grace and dignity. And so it's both my kids and my clients is really the legacy that I hope to leave. But I will kind of, one of my life goals is to have a ski run named after me. So that would be a secondary legacy, to have, Cali was my nickname in college. I played college baseball. So Cali's Couloir sounds really cool to me on After Mountain. If anyone, Mike Kaplan, the CEO, is listening, that would be a really cool legacy.
I love that. Well, thanks so much for being on the podcast today, Ryan, and for all that you do in the community. You're such a great resource for people, and I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Pamela. I appreciate the opportunity.
If you need an updated will, trust, or estate plan, and you are a Colorado resident, we would love to be your estate planning law firm. Give us a call at 720-706-0036 to schedule your complimentary 15-minute call. You can also directly schedule at lawmother.com/go. If you liked this episode and you want to learn more, you should definitely check out my international best-selling book, Legally Ever After. It's available on Amazon as both an ebook, a paperback, and an audio version. And if you'd like a free chapter, head over to lawmother.com/LEA.